Special report, Virginia decides. Thank you for streaming with us on WUSA 9+. I'm Leslie Foster. Believe it or not, Election Day is Tuesday. That's just a few days away, and we've got a whole lot to get to in this final stretch. So let's jump right into those newest poll numbers. These are coming from Roanoke College. In the governor's race, Democrat Abigail Spanberger has a 10-point lead over Republican Winsome Earl-Sears. We've seen Spanberger hold a pretty steady lead throughout this race. The Democratic candidate is also ahead in the race for lieutenant governor. State Senator Ghazala Hashmi leads Republican John Reed by just 2 points. And in that closely watched attorney general race, things are changing by the day. Republican incumbent Jason Miyares now leads Democrat Jay Jones by 8 points. That is a reversal from Roanoke College's last poll in August. So we wanted to take a closer look at these numbers. We spoke with Dr. Harry Wilson. He's the interim director for the Institute for Policy and Opinion Research at Roanoke College. Here's his conversation with our Annie Yu.
Let's start with the governor's race. Your poll shows that Democrat Abigail Spanberger with a 10-point lead over Republican candidate Winsome Earl-Sears. Walk us through the findings here, and what do you think is driving that lead?
Well, I think there's a couple things going on there. One is that Abigail Spanberger is doing incredibly well among Democrats. 98% of the Democrats said they were going to vote for Spanberger. And normally my personal line is sort of like, I think you should be 90% or above. Winsome Earl-Sears is at 92% of Republicans, which is good, but not as good as 98%. And also Spanberger's got a 23-point lead among independents. So when you put those two things together, that's why we are where we are.
Virginia is one of the few states that elects a new governor 1 year after the presidential election. And historically, the party that holds the White House tends not to win the Virginia governor's race. But it's a strong trend, but it's not an absolute rule, right? So do you think that President Trump's policies have an impact in this governor's race?
Well, I think President Trump, his approval rating and favorability rating in Virginia consistently is around 40%. Upper 30s, lower 40s. That was true in his first term. That's true in his second term. So he is not a positive overall. He's not a positive attribute in a Virginia electoral race. We saw 4 years ago that Governor Youngkin sort of tiptoed around him and, essentially sort of told him to stay away. Understanding that he's a double-edged sword. He certainly motivates the Republican base, but he also motivates some Democrats to come out and oppose him or oppose people that he supports.
Right. In the race for a lieutenant governor, Democrat Ghazala Hashmi leading Republican John Reed. Why do you think there's a narrower margin here compared to the governor's race?
That race is interesting, and most of the polling has had that race very close, as we do. I think in the current situation, that race has really sort of flown underneath the radar of almost everyone because there's always a lot of attention paid to the top of the ticket, obviously, whoever's running for governor. And because, what I assume we'll talk about in 2 seconds, because of what's going on in the attorney general's race, lieutenant governor is almost like an afterthought in this. And even if you look at TV ads, at least where I am in southwestern Virginia, I'm seeing a ton of ads for the governor's race and the attorney general's race, and a handful for lieutenant governor. So I think it's simply getting less attention.
Let's talk about the race for attorney general now. This poll shows that Republican incumbent Jason Miyares leading Democrat Jay Jones by 8 points. Your last poll in August was the opposite, with Jay Jones leading Miyares. How big of a role did the texting scandal from Jay Jones play, the text of him wishing violence on his political adversaries? What do you think is behind this shift?
Well, I think that's it. We didn't specifically ask much about that. We did ask if people voted early, how much of an impact it had. And for those who voted for Jones, it had virtually no impact. 87% of them said they would still would have voted for Jones anyway. Only 1% they would have voted for Miyares. But what's going on there is really two things. Jones has lost support among Democrats. He's down to 77% of Democrats. And I told you earlier, Spanberger was up at 98%. That's a big, big difference. They have not, however, gone over to Miyares. The Democrats have not. They went from 1% saying they would vote for him in August to 2% now. but many of them are saying they're undecided. The other thing that's happened there again is Miyares has flipped with independents, and he's now leading among independents by 4% within a margin of error of the poll, but still a big difference from where it was in August. And the only logical thing to point to there is the texting scandal with Jones. I mean, it's blatantly obvious. So we didn't really have to, I don't think, even ask about that because nothing else at that level has gone on in that race.
Right. Tell us about more about this poll, how you went about conducting it, who you spoke to, and how you reached out to folks.
Sure. This was likely voters. So all the respondents came from a registered voter list. So we confirmed first that they were the person, that this was the person who we were trying to reach. Secondly, that they were still a Virginia resident. And then third, how likely they were to vote. So if they said they hadn't already voted, or were almost certain to vote, or extremely likely, we essentially kick them out. So this really is likely voters. And they were all phone calls, either to landlines and cell phones, or in some cases, texts that were sent to cell phones, and then people were asked to complete the survey online. So we call that text to web. And that's essentially where this sample came from.
The margin of error with this poll is just over 4%. How comfortable are you predicting the outcome from these numbers?
Well, any reputable pollster is never going to predict an outcome. I mean, I think we would all unanimously say that is really not what we do. Um, certainly it creates expectations in my mind, and I think the minds of other people as well. But many people are fond correctly of saying that the only poll that counts is the one that's taken on Tuesday, or where people are already voting, and that is 100% accurate. Polls can be wrong. We like to think that we're correct. We try our very best to be correct. I can assure everyone of that. But because there is a margin of error, and still there's the 95% probability that it's within the margin of error, 5%, that even if we did everything correctly, it could be outside of that. So a poll is in fact a poll. It's not an election.
I'm curious here, are you seeing any signals that certain demographic groups are shifting differently this cycle compared to previous years?
Not so much really, no. I think that the big questions are always, can you keep your partisans together? And at the top of the ticket, they both seem to be doing that. Spamberger incredibly well. 98% is just, I don't know, in 30 years of polling that I've actually seen that before. I expect candidates to be in the 90s. And the other thing that I always look at is where independents are going. The other thing that obviously becomes important is turnout. If Republicans turn out in greater numbers than we anticipate, then this could be much closer, or conceivably you could even see an Earl Sears victory. And everyone's trying to predict turnout, and no one has a crystal ball that's going to do that with 100% accuracy. We know that after Tuesday. Before Tuesday, we honestly don't know. We make educated guesses. The educated guess or estimate, I would like to say, that we make is we statistically weight to match the 2021 Virginia exit poll. So we are assuming the electorate in 2025 is going to look like 2021. That's usually a safe assumption. It could be off by 1% here, 1% there, but it's usually pretty consistent. But that can be wrong. We saw that, for example, in 2016, when most national polls underestimated lower education level voters. And that was pretty consistent across the country. These things can happen. They don't happen every election. It's frankly uncommon, but it can happen.
Elaborating more on the turnout and what's fueling voters to the polls. Your poll mentioned threats to democracy and inflation as the top issues driving voters. Do you see these issues influencing voter behavior in this election, especially for independents and voters who may be less engaged?
I think the big difference there is which issues seem to be most important to various partisans. The threats to democracy, not surprising, was much more frequently cited by Spamberger voters than by Sears voters. It's like 40, trying this off the top of my head, I think it was 48% of Spamberger voters, was 48% thought threats to democracy the most important issue. For Sears voters, 7% said that. But Sears voters, for example, were more likely to cite immigration, 24% of them versus only 4% of Spamberger voters. They were pretty much even on inflation and the cost of living, 23%, 22%. So they were basically the same there. But we can see that the partisans are emphasizing different issues. In some ways, we don't see that frequently. And I would have expected the economy, frankly, to dominate in both. So that was one surprise that I saw in this. That the economy was certainly important, no doubt about that. And when you throw in jobs and taxes, then that 20-some% goes up to around 30. But I think for Democrats right now, nationally and in Virginia, threats to democracy seems to be the catchphrase, which in some ways, from my personal perspective, I think is almost synonymous with I despise Donald Trump. And I see it as a sort of a catch-all that it can mean a lot of different things. But I think at the core, it means basically I just don't like Donald Trump very much.
It looks like democracy, yes, but also health care seems to be driving Democrats as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Healthcare to some extent, honestly, that was not on our list. So we did not ask about that. Healthcare is an important issue in there. Education is to some extent as well, but education also didn't really make it onto the list.
Before we let you go, is there one thing that you'll be watching closely for on election night?
I think one thing that we've seen in some recent elections, nationally and in Virginia as well, is the impact of early voting. And that what we see when we see election returns on election night, Republicans are more likely to vote on election day. Democrats tend to dominate in the early voting. And we saw that in when we broke out those people who voted early, much more likely to support Spamberger than Earl Sears, larger than the margin that we're seeing overall in the poll. So when we see reports just from the precincts and people who voted on election day, it looks as if Republicans may be ahead. And as the night goes on, we saw this in 2021, we saw this in 2020, to some extent in 2024. As the night goes on, Democrats pick up steam because those early ballots, those absentee ballots, are not generally counted until the end. So we see the Democrats roll up larger numbers at the end of the evening than we see in early on.
Good insight. Dr. Harry Wilson, Interim Director for the Institute for Policy and Opinion Research at Roanoke College. We thank you for your time and shedding more light in these important races.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you.
Last night, some of the candidates hit the campaign trail in Loudoun County, and our Katie Lesso caught up with them.
'Twas the night before Halloween, and hundreds put on their Halloween best for the annual Leesburg Halloween Parade.
I am a cowgirl tonight.
Phyllis Randall is the chair of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors.
This is one of the largest parades in the South, our Halloween parade in Leesburg. I'm not sure how it got to be like this, but it's a huge parade. I literally bought almost $500 worth of candy to give out.
Just days before the election, Democratic candidate for Lieutenant Governor Ghazala Hashmi also along the route.
We are so excited.
We spoke to her opponent, John Reed, Saturday about the debate he created with an AI version of Hashmi. Can you talk to me about why you decided to do that?
Well, 125 days I begged my opponent to do a debate. You remember I said the first day, I said, can we do 10? They can be on the radio or TV, whatever. She said no, she would never do a debate.
Why didn't you want to have a debate with him?
So, you know, what we've seen from his campaign and basically the entire ticket is that they just want a spectacle. They don't want a serious conversation.
She stands by her decision. So is it fair to say you don't think a debate was needed?
I don't think it was needed, not when it would be a spectacle rather than a sincere and honest conversation about policy.
A few blocks into the parade, Democratic candidate for governor Abigail Spamberger joined the party. She wouldn't answer our questions as she arrived, but did stop for some photos as some in the crowd cheered. Her opponent, Winsome Earl Sears, told us this week that she was feeling confident.
Yeah, you see this big smile on my face? It's because we know we've got the momentum, we've got the enthusiasm, because we've got the right message. It's a common sense message.
For those not running for office, this parade a chance to unwind and take a breath.
It's always a lot of fun to be here.
At a time when real life has been tough for so many.
Just to keep up the norms and traditions of our county, we're not going to let those things falter. We're not going to let them fall. We're still going to have hope. We're still going to smile. We're still going to try to have fun in the county, and we're doing that tonight at this parade.
In Leesburg, Katie Lasso, WUSA 9.
And take a look at this scary moment from the trail yesterday. The campaign bus for Winsome Earl Sears caught fire on the way to an event. Now, she posted on X saying everyone on board was safe. She also thanked the first responders for quickly putting out the flames. Her Democratic opponent, Abigail Spanberger, also responded. She says she's relieved to hear that Earl Sears is safe, and she's thinking of the lieutenant governor and her team. We know it's certainly been a fierce campaign in the race for Attorney General. Kurt Williams from our sister station in Norfolk just spoke with both candidates about the controversy.
In my opinion, he has disqualified himself. I don't think he passes the most basic test of decency, to wish violence on children and to want to see a political assassination of your opponent. I don't think that's acceptable. I think he's disqualified himself.
I've taken accountability for my actions, and it's now time for Jason to take accountability for his and his failure to prosecute any case against Donald Trump. He's had more than 50 opportunities to hold the administration accountable, and he can't do it because he is too weak to stand up to the president.
So I want to read parts of his apology. Quote, this is the quote, "Issue my deepest apology. I am embarrassed, ashamed, and sorry. This was a grave mistake."
So I view this apology as him trying to save his political career because he's a politician. He's not a prosecutor. And so I think this election now is much more about who is the best person to keep us safe. It's about right versus wrong. It's about a basic standard of decency we should expect of our leaders.
Well, look, his record is one of a failure to stand up to the president. In these last 9 months, he's had over 50 chances to hold this administration accountable, and he's not done it. And it's because he's too weak and too scared to stand up to Donald Trump. And that's what this race is about, holding the president and this administration accountable during these challenging times when people are out of work because they were illegally fired.
I sued this administration, the current administration, the VA administration, over denial of benefit. So it just shows that even the single biggest mission you have in the Attorney General's office is not politics, it's prosecution.
Mainly what he was saying was, you will not stand up to President Trump.
So this shows he doesn't know what office he's running for. You're the top prosecutor in the state. You're the top cop, as they say.
Is there a risk of making a good bit, if not all, of the campaign about Trump is bad for Virginia? Miyares is afraid to stand up to Trump. Is there a risk in putting all of your political eggs in the anti-Trump basket?
Look, I think that's just the reality of the situation. When Donald Trump continues to run roughshod over Virginia.
What does this race come down to for Attorney General?
I think it's between a prosecutor and a leftist politician. I think the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And I have a proven record. We had the #1 drop in addiction deaths of any state in the entire country, more than double the national average. My office alone has prosecuted and removed enough fentanyl off the streets that would have killed 7 million Virginians.
Well, look, for my entire career, I've held people accountable. As a delegate, when we fought to make changes here in Virginia for the better, as an assistant attorney general, when we took on anti-competitive mergers to keep prices down for consumers across this country, we took on the biggest ghost gun manufacturer in the country and put them out of business. We held the big banks accountable. So I've got a track record of doing that and getting things done.
Out of the 3 top statewide races, recent polls show the most tightening and lead changes is this one, the race to be Virginia's next Attorney General. In Norfolk, Kurt Williams, WTKR News 3.
Looking ahead to Tuesday, we could see something that hasn't happened in 20 years, a split ticket election in Virginia. That means the same party will not win all big 3 races, the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. Based on current polling, it's a very likely possibility. Most polls have Democrats winning the governor and lieutenant governor races, but when it comes to the attorney general, the incumbent Republican is leading. The last time a split ticket happened was back in 2005. Republicans won the races for lieutenant governor and attorney general, but Virginians elected a Democrat, Tim Kaine, as governor. All 100 seats in Virginia's House of Delegates are up for grabs next Tuesday, and the stakes for those state house races are higher now that Democrats want to redraw Virginia's congressional maps. Matt Gregory explains.
Unlike Texas or North Carolina, Virginia can't just redraw its maps through a single bill. There are multiple steps, multiple General Assembly sessions, and an election in the middle, and all of that finished with a final vote by the public. Both the House of Delegates and the state Senate voted on a special redistricting bill. Basically, it would strip this independent commission of its authority to draw maps and give that power back to the General Assembly, where both chambers are controlled by the Democrats. Now, the bill passed in the House on Wednesday, and today Senate Democrats said Virginia must push back against what they call partisan gerrymandering in Republican states ahead of 2026. Republicans, meanwhile, urge them to keep Virginia out of what they describe as a political arms race.
The way things are moving now, it's important enough that Virginians be able to weigh in April. This is a very measured policy that we would put before them. Very measured.
So now I'm talking to the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia, who I suspect about 8 million out of the 8.5 are gathered around their Apple pads watching us debate this issue.
Senator Peake's message there directed at voters because they're part of the process in order for this to become a law. You see, it did pass in this special session, the amendment did, but lawmakers would again have to have passed the amendment in the next General Assembly session. But first, Virginians head to the polls. Now, right now, the House of Delegates is controlled by Democrats, and every House of Delegates seat is on the ballot this year. If Democrats win in the election on Tuesday, the process moves forward. But if Republicans take the House of Delegates, redistricting efforts end there.
The General Assembly needs to remain in Democratic control, and we need to elect Abigail Spanberger to be governor, because even if the voters were to pass the constitutional amendment in April, if the governor didn't call a special session, there's going to be no maps to redraw.
Now, even if Democrats hold the majority, it's not a done deal. You see, the bill has to return to the General Assembly in January. If it's passed again, voters would then face a referendum likely 90 days after that on whether or not to approve the change in the congressional maps. And if voters say yes, the General Assembly would then redraw congressional maps with the goal of finishing them before the June 16th primary. I'm Matt Gregory, WUSA 9.
Governor Glenn Youngkin also weighed in. He said in part, quote, everything about this process was shameful, fundamentally wrong, and illegal. Virginians are not leverage. They deserve fair districts, and they will not forget this injustice. Don't forget, tomorrow is the last day for in-person early voting. Of course, you can still vote in person on Tuesday. You can also send a mail-in ballot as long as it is postmarked by 7 p.m. on Election Day. We put together a pretty easy